Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So, as you can see by the title, today is the last video of my Black Lives Matter series that I'm kind of doing. I'm not really sure how long this video is going to be, but I really wanted to make this into a separate video because some of these points I feel like are really important to actually talk about. But yeah, so today's video is basically just going to be full of different ways that you can help the cause, the Black Lives Matter movement, ways that you can help Black people during their everyday prejudice, racism, and the microaggressions, and just everything else that's going on. I feel like this is really important to talk about because a lot of people really want to help with the situation, but they do not know where to start. They don't know what to do. They don't know what they can do for themselves. They don't know what they can do for other people to try and help with the situation, try to help people cope. They don't know what to do, what to say. So this video is just to help everybody, whether it's other Black people, whether it's white people, whether it's Hispanic people, Asian people, people of all ethnicities, people in different countries. It's literally all people can use these things to help support the Black Lives Matter movement. So the very first thing that I really want to talk about, which I think is pretty much the most important way that you can really help in this situation, is educating yourself and helping educate others if you are educated. There are plenty of ways that you're able to get educated, ways you are able to help educate people. One great way to help educate yourself and help educate other people is answering and asking questions. If you are educated in this situation and somebody asks you a question, the best way to help is to answer it. If you're not educated and you have a question for a Black person, if you have a question for any other person, if you have a question just for someone who's educated on it, ask the question. It's not bad to be curious and confused, and I feel like people really let their pride get in the way of all this because you cannot just be educated. You have to want to be educated. You can only do so much to try and help other people, but you need to want it yourself. So if you are not interested in getting educated, you're not going to help anybody. You're not going to get educated because you're not going to care. So don't let your pride get in the way, and if you genuinely have a question, feel free to ask. You can ask me if you want to. You can ask anybody you know that is knowledgeable of this subject. But yeah, so basically just ask questions if you have them, because it really does allow you to learn where you're lost and where you're confused. That way you can be fully knowledgeable and fully educated. And then of course, going along with asking questions, have conversation. Having conversations is the best way to learn about a person, best way to learn about experiences. If you're curious, again, ask questions, have conversations with Black people, to ask them about their experiences, learn about what they've been through, ask other people what they've been through. Literally just having conversations and asking questions and learning, that's the best way that you're going to learn. That's the best way that you're going to soak up information, by having just a naturally held conversation. If you feel strongly about something and you want to express it, have that conversation. It's a really simple and good way to be able to get educated, and it's also a really good way for you to educate people. Have that conversation with people. Talk to them about how you feel, talk to them about what you've been through, tell your experiences. And especially if someone tells you something, then listening is such an important way that you're going to learn. If a Black person tells you that something is racist, you shut up and you learn. You listen, you soak it all in, you try to understand. If you don't understand, ask questions. Don't be disrespectful, don't interrupt, don't scream and yell at them and tell them that you're wrong. You shut up, you listen. Same thing if a girl tells you that something was sexual harassment. You shut up and you listen. You respect them, you have that conversation with them, and that is literally one of the best ways that you're going to learn about anything. Another great way to educate yourself and to learn about new things is simply by watching movies and TV shows and listening to music and listening to TED Talks and reading books and all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of suggestions for each one of those things that I had just said. But first thing that I want to say, if you are going to try and educate yourself by watching a movie or watching a TV show, you're not going to be educating yourself on the Black Lives Matter movement and why all of this stuff is so important to Black people if you watch a movie that has a white savior in it. You can watch movies with white people. I'm not saying you can't, but like The Help, for example, that's a good movie. Like, I like that movie. I think it's a cute movie. I think it's a good, like, good vibe movie. But you're not really learning anything or educating yourself about the Black Lives Matter movement, because in the end, it's the white person who basically saves all these black people by writing this book. It's not the black people doing it themselves. It's the white person. So you can still watch The Help, like, if you want, but that is not the way that you're going to educate yourself in the proper way, by watching a movie or a TV show with a white savior in it, you know? So that's my first thing, but let's get into the actual suggestions. For the first two movies I have is The Hate You Give, which is also a book. Really highly recommend that book. But The Hate You Give, I really enjoy this movie. In case you didn't know what it is, it's basically this girl, her childhood best friend, ends up getting shot and killed by a police for picking up a hairbrush. She has a white boyfriend. She goes to a white school because her family does not want her to go to school in the ghetto, you know, like they don't want to put her in danger. They don't want her to get pregnant. They don't want to do all that kind of stuff. So basically, she just ends up speaking out about this issue, and you guys can just simply watch this movie. Highly recommend it. It's also a very good book, so if you want to read the book before you watch the movie, that's another really good thing. And then the other movie that I highly recommend that I really enjoyed was Queen and Slim. Basically, this movie is about two people. They go on a date. They end up getting pulled over. Can't really remember completely why they got pulled over, but the police officer asked to check his car for no reason, and for some reason he ends up pulling the gun, and I don't remember if he pulls the gun out on the woman and shoots her in the leg. So then the guy has the instinct to grab it. He ends up accidentally shooting the cop, so they are basically on the run for their lives because the entire US is searching for them. It ends up sparking up a bunch of protests and a bunch of riots and all that kind of stuff. So almost kind of like what's going on right now, except for it wasn't a cop that died, it was the other way around. But the riots were not against the black people. It was against the cop because they're trying to kill these black people and whatever. But that is also a very good movie. I think it was really helpful. It kind of connects to what's going on right now. Very good acting. Both of these movies are very good acting, I think. Very emotional movies. But I don't know, I'm just an emotional person. But I highly recommend those two movies. And also with the movies, these movies are not on Netflix. I don't believe they're on Hulu, and you can get them on Amazon Prime or like maybe Redbox. I don't know. For the TV shows and series, both of these series are actually on Netflix. Also, another thing to mention, right now Hulu and Netflix and maybe even Amazon literally have a whole entire black section right now because of everything that's going on. So I highly recommend that you go and check that out. Not all of it is necessarily about like Black Lives Matter, but it is like black actors, black centralized movies. So I highly recommend that you go check that section out. The first one is Dear White People. I think that this is a really good series to watch. Has a lot of sex in it, so beware about that. But I feel like it is very educational. It's basically this girl, she has a podcast called Dear White People, talking about her experiences as a mixed woman, and she talks about things like blackface, talks about like her hair, like just a bunch of stuff on this podcast throughout the show. She's also in like the Historically Black Club. I can't remember really what it's called, but she's in that club, and they discuss like a bunch of issues that go on during campus, all that kind of stuff. So I think that is a very good show. And then the other series that I'm going to recommend is When They See Us. Basically, if you don't know the story about the exonerated five kids of, I believe 4 of them were black and 1 was Hispanic. They all got blamed for the rape of this woman in the forest when actually they did not do it. This is also based on a true story. They did not do it. They got sent to prison. They went to jail for years. They afterwards couldn't really get a job because of their record, all that kind of stuff, until finally the actual rapist did come out and say that he was the rapist, because I'm pretty sure he was getting put on death row anyway, so he was kind of just like, oh, whatever, I don't care. It was either death row or he was like being put in jail for life, so he decided to come out for that murder or for that rape. But yeah, so that's another show that I highly recommend you check out. Very emotional for me too. After you watch that, I highly recommend like I believe it was the Oprah interview afterwards that like plays after that series. But yeah, another really good show. Then documentaries, both of these are on Netflix. The first one that I highly recommend, and I honestly don't know if they're like called documentaries, but this is like basically documentary like style movies or whatever. The first one is The 13th. It basically just talks about Okay, I'm literally dumb. I explained this so bad, so I just deleted it. Basically, the 13th is they're focusing on the Jim Crow laws, but the lady that like directed it and like produced it or whatever is basically trying to make the point that like how much the what is it called, like the amount of like black people in jail and in prison is like so disproportionate to like compared to white people or whatever. So like basically she's talking about like the police brutality, Jim Crow laws. Like it's basically just a documentary talking about like how unfair it is and like the different statistics and all that on why like there are more black people in like prison than like white people, and like why they get blamed and this and that and this and that. So that's a better explanation than what I said in this video. Talks about a lot of statistics, very educational. I highly recommend that. Okay, so I'm dumb again. The video or the movie that I actually like recommended ended up not being a movie and it ended up being a TV show, and it wasn't even a documentary. So the new documentary that I recommend is LA 92. Is basically talking about, I believe his name was Rodney King, and it talks about riots and loots and everything surrounding his case, because whatever he didn't actually do it. But yeah, so I would go watch that. That's also on Netflix. So I do recommend that. Now with some books. This is the first book that I'm going to recommend. It's called Homegoing by, I might butcher her name, Ya Gyasi. Highly recommend this book. Basically, it's about two girls actually, and they were both born in Africa, way back during the African slave trade, but they both basically went through separate paths. One of them was a slave, and she was raped by one of the guardmen who was like shipping the slaves off, so she had a kid through that way. And then the other one, her family basically like gave her up or whatever to one of the white men that came into her village, and they had sex and she had a kid through that way. But basically it's going through both of their lives and both of their generations. Each chapter is a different child from the generations, and it's basically just talking about the experiences and the ways that the African slave trade and all the racism and prejudice has affected black people throughout all centuries, all generations since the African slave trade. That's when the time started. So it goes all the way up until even now. So I definitely highly recommend this book. It's a really good book. And then the other book that I recommend, which basically teaches you about oppression, and racism and prejudice, all that kind of stuff, how it stemmed, how it is today. It's called Stamped, and it's by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, I believe is who it's by. Ibram also has other books out that are similar to that kind of book, but that's another book that I highly recommend you check out. And you can of course always look up shows and movies and books and stuff like that that help you get knowledgeable about the subject. I'm just giving you a couple of suggestions of mine. Then we have podcasts that I recommend. The first podcast that I'm going to recommend is called Code Switch. Both of these podcasts, by the way, are on Spotify. I'm sure they're on other podcast apps too as well. But Code Switch is basically where a bunch of black and colored journalists come together and they all talk about race, they talk about prejudice, they talk about issues that they feel, how to tackle their issues, all of that kind of stuff, talk about their experiences on the subject and their opinions and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's a really good way to get educated, because you're not just getting one person's view, you're not just getting one person's opinion, one person's experiences, but you're getting everybody's. The other podcast that I recommend is Mixed Company. This podcast basically talks about how to get equity and how people are striving to like have equity in the workplace, have equity basically just in the world. They're talking about different ways that you can achieve it, that kind of stuff, which is really what we're looking for. Yeah, equity is a very important thing. So I highly recommend that podcast if you want to learn more about equity, how you can help the issue about equity, all that kind of stuff. Then I'm going to talk about some TED Talks. I don't know, I personally love TED Talks. I feel like it's a really good way to get educated, and I will also have a majority of these things linked down below as well, like the TED Talks, the podcasts, the music that I'm about to recommend, and yeah. But the TED Talks that I really recommend are How to Deconstruct Racism, One Headline at a Time, and I might mess up this guy's name, but it's by Baratunde Thurston. Obviously, it's very, very simple what it's about. He's talking about deconstructing racism. But yeah, so I feel like that's a really good one to watch. And then this one also, Clint Smith is one of my favorite TED Talk and poetry like people, because I also love poetry. But How to Raise a Black Son in America. It's a very short TED Talk, and I wouldn't say it's as much educational as it as much as it is eye-opening. It's not necessarily that he like teaches you about a lot, but I feel like his words and what he says really opens your eyes to what really goes on in America that not a lot of people like think about on a daily basis. And then lastly, with the music section that I'm going to recommend, they kind of educate, again, kind of eye-opening versus educating, but the song I'm Not Racist by Joyner Lucas, I highly recommend this song because it's basically like, I believe it's a 6-minute song, and it's basically split down the middle, where the first half of the song is like a white person's point of view talking about how he feels about black people, and the second half is about the black person's point of view. It's basically just talking about both sides of the story, how both people feel. But yeah, so I highly recommend that song. It's a very powerful song, and it's also a very good song. The other song that I highly recommend is I Can't Breathe by her, or HER, whatever you call her. But it's I Can't Breathe by her. I believe she just came out with it because of the whole George Floyd situation. Like, it literally, like, the music video was released like 2 days ago. But yes, so I highly recommend that song as well. It's a very powerful song. But yeah, so that's basically the end of like my educating yourself portion. Like I said, it's a very important way that you're able to help with this Black Lives Matter movement, because I feel like you can't truly stand up for black people, and you can't truly do your whole potential of like helping if you're not educated and you don't fully know what you're talking about. So make sure you get educated, make sure you help educate other people if they don't know what they're talking about. And yeah, so that's that. The next section that I'm going to talk about really quickly is just basically you need to make people uncomfortable. And not stress this enough. When you are having a conversation with somebody, don't sugarcoat things just because you don't want to trigger them. Don't sugarcoat things because you don't want somebody to be uncomfortable, and you don't want to lose a friend because of it, and this and that, this and that. You're not helping anybody by sugarcoating anything. If you want to cause change, you need to make people uncomfortable, because if you're not making people uncomfortable, they're going to sit there and think that everything is comfortable, everything's okay, everything's going to be fine, which it's not, obviously. So you need to be very brutally honest. Do not sugarcoat things, especially when you're trying to educate. Don't try to make people feel better about it. Simply be straight up with the facts, be straight up with how you feel. That's all I can say about that. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is basically just speaking up and making sure that you're bringing light to the situation. This conversation and this topic cannot die down. This is not a trend. This is a very important thing. People's lives are at stake. So you need to make sure that you do not let this conversation die down. You do not let this conversation just go away, disappear. That's not what we're doing. And don't be afraid to speak up. Like, if you see someone say the N-word at school that's not black, speak up and be like, hey, that's not okay. Like, don't say that. Like, that's not okay. Don't do this. Don't do that. You're wrong. You're right. Don't be afraid to speak up, because if you're not speaking up, nobody else is going to speak up. You need to be the person to take the step to speak up and stand up for what's right. Basically, just if you're not going to do it, don't expect anybody else to do it, and don't expect change if you're not going to speak up and talk about the issues that are going on today. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is like basically literally just like supporting black owned businesses and or black artists, black singers, black painters. Just support black people. In the document down below, in that Google Doc that I always have linked down below now in my videos, there is a little section that has like black owned businesses, but basically I'm just going to be talking about a couple people. So like supporting black artists by spreading the word about them, by listening, by streaming their music, by buying their products, by doing all this stuff, is supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in itself. Some black singers that I really enjoy and I really think are really good. Jay Warren, I might be saying her name wrong, Mahalia or Malia, Ari Lennox, Pip Millett, and then Jasmine Sullivan. Those are all very good black artists. At least the smaller ones, the underrated ones that I feel are underrated. And then supporting black owned businesses. I'm only really knowledgeable about the hair care black owned businesses. I don't really know about a lot of black owned clothing brands or skincare brands, but if you have curly hair, these are definitely for you. I don't really know if these people have non-curly hair lines, but for hair, Design Essentials, Thank God It's Natural, also TGIN, Camille Rose, and then Miels. Those are all curly hair brands that are black owned. So support black owned businesses, black artists, black everything. Just support black people, period. And then if you are white, use your privilege to protect black people, and use your privilege to teach people. But also just recognizing that you have privilege in its own and using it to Black people's advantages. So if you go to a protest, protect the Black people. But yeah, basically just using your white privilege to protect and to teach, whether it's in the school system, whether it's at a protest, whether it's in everyday life, in the store. If someone's calling someone names on the street, you go up there and use your white privilege. Like, just use your privilege to protect, use your privilege to educate, to teach, to speak up. That's the best I can say about that. Also, check in with your Black friends, with your Black family. Check in with Black people. Right now, especially, it's a really hard time. It's really hard to be Black. So you need to check in with them, like mentally, physically, spiritually. You need to check in with these people very often. Being Black can be stressful, from simply going to the store to going on a walk. Like, being Black is almost like a weight on people's shoulders that is not lifted yet because of the issues that are going on today. Be sure to just check in with your Black friends. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them how they're doing mentally, how they're doing physically. Have they worked out? Have they gone outside? Have they been making sure that they're taking care of themselves and focusing time on themselves? Just make sure that you are checking in on your Black friends, because not only do Black lives matter, but Black mental health matters as well. And then another way that you can help is, of course, attending all the protests and all the walks that you possibly can, but make sure to keep it peaceful. If your parents don't let you go out to a protest because they find it unsafe, don't go against their wishes. Don't go behind their back. Like, go to whatever you can. Make sure you spread the word about protests if you can't go. And then the last thing that I'm going to say about how you can help this Black Lives Matter movement is, if you're Black, if you're white, if you're any person of color, don't try to hold everything on your back. Like, do not hold the whole entire world on your shoulders and expect everything to change just because you say something. I feel like if I'm going to say something to a person, their mind's automatically going to change. They're going to automatically feel different. Like, I'm already making everything better. So don't stress about it. Obviously, this is not something that we should be taking lightly, but at the same time, you can't have other people's negativity taking a toll on your mental health because they don't want to listen and they don't want to be open-minded. You're only 50% of the equation. If you want to tell somebody that they're being ignorant, like I said earlier, they need to be open to be educated. Otherwise, they're not going to be educated, and there's no point. Like, it's not going to work. They're not going to want to listen to you. Don't hold the whole entire world on your shoulders, especially Black people. But yeah, so that is basically the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys stayed tuned with all of my Black Lives Matter videos. I'll link the other ones down below, and they'll probably be popping up as cards up here throughout the video. But yeah, so thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with all of your friends, share it on all your platforms. Thank you guys for all of your support. I really appreciate you all. And yeah, so thank you guys for watching, and after this video, we'll basically be getting back to normal programming. But I will always have the Black Lives Matter links down below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys.